views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Social Justice Forums. I am Daren, Jaime, and we thank you for joining us. Now, if you're asking the question, what exactly are the Social Justice Forums? Well, it's a show that deals with many of the inequities that people face. We talk from many points of view. We promote civic engagement, and we offer you an opportunity to hear perspectives that you might not always hear. So we encourage you to stay with us because the Social Justice Forums begins right now. And welcome back to the show. Jews for Racial and Economic Justice is the home for Jewish New Yorkers to organize alongside our neighbors and allies to fight for New York, where community has the freedom, opportunity, and also the resources that are necessary to thrive. Now, JFREJ exists to fight against the status quo and work side by side with other communities to contest for the power to govern ourselves and end the injustices, as well as the violence serving the interests of the 1% and hurt everyone else. Well, joining us now to share a little bit more is the Director of Strategic Projects at JFREJ, Leo Ferguson. And if you don't know, again, that's Jews for Racial and Economic Justice. And Leo, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a total pleasure.
Appreciate having you and having this conversation. And I gave a little bit of an intro to our viewers about your organization, but for those who may not know, just give us a little bit more.
So JFREJ was founded 30 years ago and has been working in New York City with, really, defined by its commitment to working locally in New York to fight for racial and economic justice. We've been involved in campaigns for housing justice. We've worked consistently for police accountability and, against police violence for, most of our history. We fought for worker rights, immigrant rights, and against hate violence. So, we've been, grown dramatically and steadily for, a very long time. Our members live in all 5 boroughs and come together, from many different Jewish traditions and, different ethnic and racial backgrounds, all working together to fight for a city that works for everyone.
Yeah. And I know that as we talk about a lot of the challenges across the city, across the state, across the nation, one of the major challenges that we're still dealing and contending with that particularly hits home for you is anti-Semitism. Can you talk to us about the work that you're doing? And first of all, share your perspective on where you see things with regards to anti-Semitism. Are we seeing things becoming better, or are we seeing things getting progressively worse?
Thank you. It's a great question. So JFREJ really dove in and started working on this actually, like, even before the election of Donald Trump. We understood that something was wrong in the way that we were thinking about anti-Semitism, that the conversation about this topic had really been captured by the right and was often used as a tool to silence dissent, stop protesters, all kind, and really used as like a tool to attack the left in a way that didn't really reflect the values and priorities of Jews, certainly Jews living in the United States. And so we decided that, we had a role to play in trying to think about anti-Semitism in the same way that we think about every other kind of injustice and oppression, racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia. Think about it intersectionally, think about it with a progressive lens. And so in 2017, right after the election, and then of course we saw the rise of the white nationalist movement, happening almost in tandem with this project that we started, and we were obviously horrified to see Donald Trump become president and bring with him into the White House, the sort of white supremacy in a more virulent and overt form, of a kind that we hadn't seen in decades. And so in 2017, we published our guide, Understanding Anti-Semitism, which was an offering to our movements, which is really, our attempt to sort of like give all of the other social justice movements and other communities who hadn't had to think about this hadn't had anti-Semitism, thrust in their face in the way that we, had with the Unite the Right rally and, all the kinds of, violence that we've seen since then. To try to frame the issue and give people the information and resources that they needed to understand how to contend with this new wave of really awful white supremacy. At the same time, if there's any kind of silver lining to this, it's a moment in which I think it's become crystal clear just how much the safety and freedom and dignity of Jews is tied up with the safety and dignity and freedom of so many other communities that are under threat from this, far right movement that has now become mainstream. And so, being able to weave those connections between, the safety and freedom and dignity of Black people, including Black Jews and other Jews of color, immigrants, Muslims, LGBTQ folks, all of the communities that have been under threat from the rise of this, white Christian nationalist movement, probably the most accurate way to say it at this point. Is it worse? Is it better? Is it getting better? I think things have moved so quickly in such a short amount of time. I think what we're seeing is the white nationalist movement and the far right in general, transform and sort of reconfigure itself and test out new strategies and tactics just at the same time as we in the resistance, with our very different vision for the future, also test out different strategies and tactics. And so we're watching, our enemies reshape and rethink how they operate. And, it's a very scary moment. Trump isn't in the White House anymore. It's easy to, I think, feel sort of complacent, but we know that the movement will likely come back stronger and, sharper, and possibly with even fewer institutional guardrails to keep them from enacting really heinous policies that could harm all of us.
Yeah, well, let me drill down a little bit closer, because when we talk about what we see in New York City, we know that it's not really tied to white nationalists, we believe, but we believe that there is this Jewish hate and anti-Semitism is real. We've seen it before Trump was in office, and now I think even in New York City, when we look at some of the crimes that are being committed, they don't get the tie towards white nationalism, but they do get a tie towards the ignorant people and also people who just generally just have this sense of hatred.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as a lifelong New Yorker, it is obviously, really sad for me to see, the rise in anti-Semitism and rise in all other kinds of anti-Asian hate violence, all of the things that have swept through our city in the past couple of years. And, the work that we do at JFridge is about, once again, it's about, understanding that all of our fates are tied together. And so, we work very closely with our, other partner organizations in the Asian community and, communities all across New York to come up with the kind of collective response to hate violence that we think we need to see. But just to address the specific piece that you brought up there about white nationalism in New York. So I think one of the things that's hard for people to understand, and that includes Jews, right? It's something that I think a lot of Jews haven't had to think about for a long time, is understanding that that anti-Semitism is a systemic oppression. It's been around for 2,000 years in our world, unfortunately, and it's it should be understood in much the same way that we understand anti-Blackness, anti-Black racism, right, or other forms of oppression, which is they're out there, right? They're in the water, and they're when there are politicians and folks like that who want to sow division, they can activate this machinery that sort of brings this stuff to the surface. And so, unfortunately, it shouldn't be surprising. It should be horrifying. It should be reprehensible, but it shouldn't be surprising that when folks on the right are going on cable news and advancing anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, or, you know, doing the kinds of, when you have Tucker Carlson talking about, you know, white replacement theory on, you know, his show and things like that, right? That stuff is going to leak out into the ecosystem, and that means that you know, folks who are, you know, people with mental illness, people who had some other kind of you know, are angry for some other reason, that will become the locus of their, you know, their rage. It doesn't have to make any sense. And I think if you look at it, you know, the anti-Semitic hate violence that's happened in New York City, what you'll see is that overwhelmingly it's vandalism. It's people like drawing swastikas in places, right?
Right.
You know, you'll find a lot of folks who are, you know, anecdotally at least, or based on news reports, right, a really strong link between mental illness and, you know, any kind of actual physical attack, or, you know, a lot of the arrests that have been made by the hate crimes task force, it's mental illness, right? And at least that's playing a role. So it's, when you think about this, and when you think about that, a lot of this stuff is probably being done by teens, right, youth, like, you know, the swastika stuff, right? It's, you know, the number of people who have a deep-seated you know, well thought out small, right? What you're seeing is other things getting caught up in the maelstrom of, you know, like, you know, conspiracy theories and anti-Jewish rhetoric that is coming, unfortunately, from very powerful people on cable news and on Twitter and filtering out into the ecosystem.
Yeah. Well, as we talk about anti-Semitism, I want to switch focus for a minute and talk about another part of your advocacy, and that's really dealing with immigrants, because we know that immigrants face a huge challenge. We know the immigration, and I've talked to immigration lawyers right here on the show who've shared that since COVID and during COVID, they've seen a rise in the workload and the caseload, but that doesn't stop the fact that people are still needing services as well as advocacy as well. So how have you approached the issue of immigration within your organization?
Absolutely. So the main focus of our work, at least, you know, in the past few years around immigration, has been around getting people out of immigration detention and fighting ICE and ICE raids and the kind of state violence and state terrorism that has, you know, that unfortunately was, you know, ramped up into a fever pitch during Trump, when we had children being put in cages. And when you have COVID, you know, adding to that and making immigration detention, you know, a potential death sentence for folks, that really kicked our work into overdrive. And so, in partnership with, so, you know, Never Again Action was you know, is an effort that was helped, you know, JFridge played a role in helping to form it, and it has worked all over, you know, all over the place to bring attention to the plight of people in immigration detention and to actually get people out. And so, for example, I'm very proud of the work that we did. You know, as COVID was spreading, we, you know, much of our work, right, we sort of had to turn on a dime and address the threat that was right in front of us. And so we launched a campaign called Let My People Go, which was, you know, this was all happening around Passover. And so it was an obvious, you know, connection for us to be able to be working really intensely. And our members just dove in. They understood immediately what a threat it was and how, you know, this was a ticking time bomb, you know, for folks who were trapped in immigration detention. And so we raised, you know, a ton of money for bail funds, both jails and immigration detention, I should say. Raised a ton of money to get people out. We managed to get, you know, many people out of, you know, bail many people out of detention. And, you know, it was both, you know, really powerful for us, and also in some ways demoralizing, because there's so many people who are still there. There's so many people who, because of the, you know, completely capricious and like unjust nature of our immigration detention system, aren't even eligible for bail, or, you know, kind of have bail denied for no apparent reason. And obviously, right, all you have to do is look at what's happening at Rikers right now to understand, you know, that this problem, the system of mass incarceration, you know, of putting people in cages, is just, you know, it's a profoundly anti-human and unjust system that we all have a responsibility to try to dismantle. And that actually, if I could just add very briefly, that that connects to a work around hate violence in the sense that the thing that we understand is that the system that we have now is not the system that we need to address it, and that like throwing police, the NYPD, the hate crimes task force, those have been the primary responses to hate violence, in the same way that ICE and putting people in jail is the same response to so many other problems that we have, and that none of those things are actually making any of us safe, and in many cases, are leading to so much more harm and hurt.
Well, you kind of like led into my next question, because we were talking, as you talked about the NYPD, I know that there is a task force that's out there that deals with these things. And I was going to ask, with your work in the community, with boots on the ground, the effectiveness of what's being done. Do you feel as though that there is any effectiveness, given the fact that there is this task force and people who are supposed to be more of watchdogs and really, assisting in the aid of those persons when it comes to hate crimes?
Absolutely. So no, I would say certainly not. I think that part of what has been so angering for us, and I think unfortunately, right, with the rise in anti-Asian hate violence, like many other folks from other communities are now understanding this, which is that sending the police out is, it's window dressing. It's something that politicians like to do because it lets them show themselves an immediate way. But if we really want to confront the problem of bias, hate violence and anti-Jewish bias, other kinds of systemic hatred, we understand that the only effective way to deal with that is through education. It's through working with local communities, right? It's the things that we would understand instinctively would actually change the facts on the ground, which is educating people about their neighbors, building stronger ties between communities, empowering communities through bystander intervention training, so that people understand what to do when they see something going on, right? Like it's by making a city in which all of us feel responsible for our neighbors, the people we see on the train, the people we see on the streets, that we are sticking up for each other. And then, and possibly even more importantly, dealing with the same things that drive every other kind of crime, which is going to be poverty. It's going to be our failing social safety net, our lack of mental health services, right? Again, as I referenced before, when you look at the breakdown of, what is actually causing these incidents, right? It's, almost none of them, very few of them actually involve physical violence. The ones that do are often tied to mental health issues, right? Like this is not something in which a police response after the fact makes sense. And certainly, the way that we actually got into the hate violence work in many, one of the incidents that brought us into this was when, the police, someone had drawn a swastika on a playground in Queens, in Rego Park, and the police arrested them, and it was a 14-year-old kid, and they sent out, it was this triumphant tweet saying, "We have zero tolerance, we've caught the perpetrator." And we just thought, this is nuts, right? This makes no sense. This is not a response that's going to make anybody any safer, and is not appropriate. So that's our perspective on this.
So how would you, if you had your ideal way, how would it be implemented in a way that we can deal with combating hate violence?
Well, we've been trying, with the funds that we have, and I wish that we had a lot more, we've been trying to make this a reality. And by working within, the truth is that communities across the city have been doing this work in various ways with, profoundly under-resourced for years. We know how to do this. So you have things like restorative justice programs. You have things like upstander intervention trainings that are incredibly effective. So being done by the Center for Anti-Violence Education. We have our partners at the New York City Anti-Violence Project that have been working with the LGBTQ community for years. Folks at the Audre Lorde Project, Safe Outside the System. Drum, working with South Asian communities in Queens and Brooklyn. The Arab American Association of New York, folks all over the place who have had to deal with this in their communities and understand that if they want to create safety, the only way we're going to create it is by creating it for ourselves. And so that, and, you know, certainly, you know, the kinds of, you know, community building work that so many of those folks have done with their, with, you know, all of the diverse communities that, right, that live throughout New York City, those are the kinds of things that are really going to build real safety in the future. And what we really need more than anything is resources, right? The, you know, we had to fight tooth and nail to get, you know, a little over $1 million in 2020 in order to fund this work. That all of that funding was cut, or sorry, in 2019, all of that funding was cut in 2020 by the city council. We've had to fight tooth and nail to get a small part of that restored. The mayor's office, in the meantime, has done some, you know, good work and funded a program for, you know, at about $3 million for a bunch of community groups to be working on this. But $3 million split across, you know, dozens of organizations in a city of 8 million people is not going to get the job done. And at the same time, we're pouring, you know, $11 billion a year into the NYPD budget. You know, this is just, again, a set of priorities that doesn't make sense if we really want to get serious about the safety of our communities. If what we want is for politicians to have, you know, something, a quick, easy thing that they can go on TV with, you know, that shows a bunch of, you know, cops flooding into a community after something's happened, then keep the system that you have. If you want to have a real safety for New Yorkers, then we need a very different set of investments.
So you would be supportive of reallocation of police funds for community resources?
Absolutely, absolutely. And this is just one of many, many examples in which, you know, when we think about public safety seriously, when we think about public safety as something more than just catching bank robbers, we understand that, you know, the things that, I mean, listen, we're in a pandemic that's still killing, you know, that has killed tens of thousands of New Yorkers, that is still killing New Yorkers today. We understand that, you know, poverty, again, our tattered social safety net, our lack of, you know, the lack of health care and other services, like these are the things that are making us unsafe. And the balance is just wildly off. We need to be investing in, you know, we need to be investing in the things that are actually harming our communities and not in the things that, you know, I think a lot of people are afraid, right? It's understandable that there's a, you know, sort of visceral fear of, you know, street crime. But the truth is that the things that are actually most likely to harm us, that have been harming us, right, for decades, are the things that we're failing to tackle. So our investments are in the wrong place.
Before we go, please let our viewers know how they can support the work and be connected to some of the advocacy that you're doing.
Oh, thank you so much for that invitation. We'd love to have anyone to come and join our, you know, this is a beautiful, diverse community. You do not have to be a Jew to be a member of Jews for Racial and Economic Justice. We have incredible caucuses that are doing, you know, that have doing incredible work in our wonderful communities for Jewish people of color, for Mizrahi and Sephardi Jews, for poor and working class Jews. It's an intergenerational organization with tons of, you know, older folks, tons of younger folks doing incredible work around care and, you know, getting people all the kinds of different care that they need. You know, it's a so please come to www.jfridge.org. And now is an especially great time to do it because on the 16th, we have our Mazals Awards, which are our incredible gathering for our entire community to celebrate the work that we've done over the course of the year and to celebrate lots of other community leaders and people from throughout New York City who have been making an amazing contribution to this beautiful place that we all call home. So you can go to our website, jfridge.org, and find out about how to come to that event. We'd love to have you there.
Leo, thank you so much for being with us and sharing with us. Leo Ferguson, Director of Strategic Projects for the Jews for Racial and Economic Justice. Thank you so much for introducing our viewers to your organization and the work that you do.
Thank you so much for having me. This was really wonderful. Thank you.
All righty. Well, we're taking a quick break. We want you to stay with us. We've got a little bit more ahead on the social justice forums. So stay with us. We'll be right back.
built a media network for you.
BronxNet TV.
Come learn in your new state-of-the-art studios at Lehman College.
At Mercy College.
And coming soon to the South Bronx in the Hub.
Inspire with your stories, culture, history.
Your Bronx on BronxNet.
Engage with us.
Connect with us at your channels and at BronxNet.tv.
Learn, engage, inspire. BronxNet TV.
From the Bronx
to the world.
BronxNet.
If you're struggling to afford your internet bills during the pandemic, there's a temporary government program that may be able to help. It's called the Emergency Broadband Benefit, and it provides up to $50 monthly discount on your broadband bill to qualifying households. Find more information about the program, including if you qualify and how to enroll, at fcc.gov/broadbandbenefit, or call toll-free at 833-511-0311. That's 833-511-0311. When taking public transportation, don't touch your phone. Carry hand sanitizer and use it immediately upon leaving the bus or train. Avoid touching your face. If someone is coughing or sneezing, move away. Wash your hands with soap and water as soon as possible. Limit contact with poles. If possible, avoid rush hour. Don't eat or drink on public transportation. Keep your bag off the floor or other surfaces. Avoid directly touching turnstiles. Stay up to date with the latest from your local health department and CDC.
know that people are dealing with the health crisis, but there's also a lot of food insecurity.
We're giving out healthy food options, and that's what's key here.
If you're a senior, you have a disability, they'll actually deliver meals to you.
The residents are anxious, they're worried, they're scared, they want to be tested.
When things were happening in our community and we couldn't get the help.
There's almost a presumption of criminality that attaches to your skin color.
The site will prioritize those who are at highest risk in the population.
If you feel symptoms and you'd like to visit one of these COVID-19 testing sites here in the Bronx, you may call the State Health Department's hotline.
Important to note about this site is no reservations are needed. This is a walk-in clinic.
A lot of us are out of work and looking for something to do.
We have the machinery and the skills to make large scales of these masks and gowns.
Take care of your people. It's going to go way further than we actually can understand.
Right now, employees like myself are just adjusting to the new reality.
Reporting BronxNet, this is Tran.
Welcome back to the show. Hunger Free America is a not-for-profit organization that is working to enact the policies and programs needed to end domestic hunger and ensure all Americans have sufficient access to nutritious food. Now, the organization has been an effective champion in the fight for economic, racial, and food justice, working to implement innovative yet practical ways to have solutions to hunger. Now, joining us to share more is the CEO of Hunger Free America, Joel Berg. And Joel, good to have you.
Thanks so much for having me and focusing on this vital issue.
Yeah, I'm thanking you for the work that you're doing, because when we talk about hunger in America, it's obviously an issue that continues to grow and grow, even more further exacerbated since COVID-19. But from your perspective, give us where you see hunger in America right now.
Even before the pandemic, we had a national hunger crisis. In 2019, in the best economy in decades, 35 million Americans lived in homes that couldn't afford enough food. 35 million Americans. And that was when the economy was still theoretically in great shape. And it won't be a shock to your viewers that Bronx has a particularly high poverty and hunger rate, but it's important to understand this is a problem in all 50 states. This is a problem in urban, suburban, and rural communities across the United States, even leafy suburbs of New York City. Westchester, Rockland County, where I grew up, Nassau County, Bergen County, places that were perceived to be solidly middle-class places a generation ago, now have significant numbers of people who can't afford enough food because the prices are just too darn high and wages are just too low. And unfortunately, in the Bronx, even though the Bronx has made a lot of progress over the last few decades, there's still a boatload of poverty. A shocking 1 in 4 Bronx residents live in homes that can't afford enough food, according to Hunger Free America's survey. 1 in 4 Bronx residents struggle against hunger, and even worse, 1 in 3 Bronx children struggle against hunger. About 1 in 4 working people in the Bronx, that's people working hard, playing by the rules, just don't earn enough to feed their families. And about 1 in 5 seniors in the Bronx can't always afford enough food. Now, are people starving the way you might see in parts of the developing world? No, because there is a federal nutrition safety net. There are some charities that fill in the gaps, but people really are suffering mightily. They can't get all the food they need. They can't get the healthy food they need. And the greatest irony in the world, is that hunger and obesity are flip sides of the same malnutrition coin. In many Bronx neighborhoods that have the highest level of poverty and hunger and food insecurity also have the highest levels of obesity, because healthier food's more expensive. It's less convenient. It's harder to find in these neighborhoods. So that was before the pandemic. Since the pandemic, people in poverty and hunger became poorer and hungrier, and people at the edge of poverty became poor and hungry. Sometimes people give the impression, well, lots of rich people suffered. Not true. They had assets to fall back on. The people who suffered were either already suffering or at the edge of suffering, but it did get much, much worse.
Yeah. And so when we talk about here in the borough of the Bronx, obviously, we know a lot of people are really struggling. We know with COVID, we saw increased numbers. And as I think you mentioned it, you definitely did mention it, where there is poverty, there is going to be higher food insecurity. What can you give us about where we are as far as improving? Are we getting better or worse when it comes to food insecurity in the Bronx?
Well, we were making some progress over the previous 5 or 6 years because the minimum wage went up, there was economic growth, and an increase in the safety net. And then the bottom dropped out of everything with the pandemic, and there was a huge spike in hunger. New York City may have had up to 2 million people, food insecure, unable to afford enough food in the pandemic. But the real hero of this story is the federal government. I know it's not popular to say that the federal government can help with problems, but it's also true. Food banks and soup kitchens and food pantries and mutual aid societies and neighborhood fridges all do great work, but they are very, very, very small, and even in their collective impact. The federal safety net programs like SNAP, that used to be called food stamps, WIC for pregnant women and children under 5, the pandemic EBT program for parents for parents of kids when schools are closed. Those are at least 20 times the dollar amount of food distributed by every charity in America. And the dollar amount of those benefits skyrocketed in the pandemic because of President Biden, because of Senator Schumer, because of Senator Gillibrand, because of Congressman Torres and Espaillat. And I'm not being partisan. The fact of the matter is the Democrats got this done when the Republicans opposed it. That's just a factual statement. And things are still mighty tough. And people are really suffering on a massive level, but they're not starving to death because our very, very, very rich uncle named Sam did step up to the plate.
Yeah. So there was a recent report on hunger, and there were some very interesting findings. Give us a little bit of an update as to what the report uncovered.
We uncovered, as I said, that 1 in 4 people in the Bronx can't afford enough food. And, for those long-term Bronx residents, you remember huge swaths of the Bronx that were just burnt out and were nothing but really empty lots and old bricks and empty lots. And you say, okay, you look at that and say, well, that's poverty, that's destitution. And the fact that the housing stock at least looks a little better on the outside, that there's been such a growth in the population, including such a great increase in immigrants coming into the Bronx, really hides the reality that there still really is mass suffering and mass deprivation. And today, a little different than a few decades ago, because very few people do get cash welfare anymore. Today, the vast majority of people in the Bronx and citywide in New York and anywhere in the nation who are hungry are working. And it's not lazy bums who don't want to work. If that was ever true, that's certainly not true today. It's working parents. The minimum wage is only $15 an hour. And many people in the Bronx are excluded from that. They're undocumented immigrants who are paid under the table for less. They're tipped workers who have to rely on tips. But even if you're getting $15 an hour, that's about $25,000 a year for full-time work. And as you know, you'd be lucky in the Bronx to get a 1-bedroom apartment for, let's say, $1,500 a month. And so that's $18,000 a year. And so if you're getting paid $25,000 a year for wages and paying $18,000 a year just for rent, no shock that you don't have a lot of money left over for food. So our survey at Hunger Free America found the largest number of people who are hungry are working people, but also very significant numbers of children, senior citizens, people with disabilities, and veterans. And so it's people who've given their all to this society, and the least we can do is make sure they have enough to eat. Yeah. I also say one thing we found is there's a huge correlation between the pandemic and hunger. And so there's been a fair amount of reporting on the stark reality that the number of people who died from COVID was greater in low-income communities and communities of color, and greater per capita, in the Bronx. And the number of people who got sick from COVID was greater in the Bronx, was greater in communities of color and low-income communities. And people say, why is that? And some people say, well, low-income people were more likely to be forced to work outside, work in a supermarket, work someplace they had to commute to. They didn't have the luxury that white-collar workers such as myself have of mostly working from home, although I'm in my office today, I mostly work from home. And so we know low-income New Yorkers were forced to go out there and be exposed to other people. They were considered essential workers, even though they weren't paid as essential workers. So we know that's a problem. Number two, we know that healthcare is less available for low-income people, and sometimes the quality of healthcare is less good in low-income neighborhoods. But three, food is a huge contributor to this. We know that people who are malnourished have compromised immune systems, so they're more likely to catch COVID-19 to begin with, and more likely to pass it on. And then we also know, it's a wonkish term, comorbidities, if I can even say it, but it means things that might make you more likely to die from something. So comorbidities for COVID happen to be obesity, hypertension, heart disease, and diabetes. And so we know those things are more likely to happen to low-income people who don't have access to healthier food. And so there's no question, as our studies show, that the hunger and food insecurity in New York fueled and continues to fuel the pandemic. Now, we at Hunger Free America, we're doing outreach not only on food out of our Bronx office, but also helping people understand how they can get vaccines and how they can get boosters. And we're dispelling the myths about how these vaccines are supposedly dangerous. Vaccines have been around for a few hundred years. George Washington mandated that his troops get smallpox vaccines. The idea that this is a brand new technology that's dangerous is just as that idea is dangerous. The vaccines aren't dangerous, and we're particularly concerned that African Americans and Latinx people have lower vaccination rates than white Americans and white Bronx residents. So we really want to get the word out. And I just throw in that we under the pandemic we did open a brand new office on Sheridan Avenue in the Bronx. And we got some money from the city to do that. That money was not continued, basically because of bureaucratic infighting between the mayor and the council. So we really hope our old ally, Vanessa Gibson, the incoming borough president of the Bronx, and the council and the incoming mayor can fix this, because if not, we're going to have to close down our office in the Bronx that just has helped countless New Yorkers not only access food, but access vaccine information.
What have you heard from the elected officials, given the fact that you are on the verge of really shutting down? Have you got any intel on that?
Yeah, without getting too deep in the weeds, basically the council's blaming the mayoral administration. The mayoral administration is blaming the council, and outgoing council members are saying, well, take it up with the new council in January. And my response was, you're still on our payroll, the public payroll, till December 31st. You really need to fix this, pronto. I know Comptroller elect Lander and Mayor-elect Adams have started a task force on better payments for nonprofit groups. So we've had a lot of conversations, but no firm commitments. So if any of your viewers happen to run into any of their elected officials, I hope they'd really press this. We know that food distribution can fill in the gaps, but helping people get government benefits, which they can use at supermarkets, bodegas, farmers markets, is actually a far more impactful strategy to fight hunger. Every dollar we spend on access to these benefits generates $60 of federal benefits. But the fact of the matter is that helping people get benefits doesn't generate the warm and fuzzies feeling that giving out turkeys on Thanksgiving does. So we need people not only to act with their hearts, but also with their heads and fund the things that really are the most effective and most impactful.
You mentioned government. I want to continue to stay along that line and give me your thoughts on the Build Back Better bill and what would you like to see happen?
Well, first of all, the Build Back Better bill is really an expansion of what the Congress and the Biden administration passed in the American Rescue Plan. And as I said, the extra funding for that for low-income people, including cash through the family tax credit, dramatically reduced child poverty in the Bronx and reduced hunger. So we need the Build Back Better bill to build on that, to make it easier for kids to get school meals for free. The Build Back Better bill also would extend this program called Pandemic EBT to give parents money when their kids' schools are closed. Very, very critical to help families access food over the summer when schools are closed. And that provisions do apply to undocumented immigrants. And there are a lot of undocumented immigrants in the Bronx who I believe we should warmly welcome to this country, as this country welcomed in my immigrant forebears. And they're working hard and they're doing very dangerous underpaid jobs. So getting them food is pretty critical in the Build Back Better plan, as well as working parents. And the bill would make childcare more affordable, healthcare more affordable, housing more affordable, prescription drugs more affordable, and put more cash directly into the pockets of low-income people. So taken as a whole, the Build Back Better bill, if passed, would dramatically reduce hunger and poverty in the Bronx and nationwide. Sometimes people think hunger is a food distribution issue. It really isn't. Hunger in America is an affordability issue. We have plenty of food. We're the most agriculturally abundant nation in the history of the world. The problem isn't having food. The problem is people don't have enough money to afford food.
Yeah. So where do we go from here? I mean, obviously the advocacy continues, really shedding the light on this topic. What do you got coming around the corner in terms of advocacy and policy initiatives that you're trying to help, that you're trying to get the public aware of and trying to get the public support with?
First of all, I'd say if anyone listening needs food, you can call 1-866-3-HUNGRY, 1-866-3-HUNGRY during any workday. And we run the National Hunger Hotline on behalf of USDA, and we can get you food help. If you have the ability to donate or you have the ability to volunteer, you can go to our website at www.hungerfreeamerica.org. One thing we're excited about at the city level is Mayor-elect Adams has pledged to create what he called a My City portal to make it easier for people to apply online for a wide variety of benefits. It's sort of crazy that you have a different application system in New York to get SNAP benefits for your family, nutrition benefits, than WIC benefits for your family, also a nutrition program. And so we're really hoping the Adams administration works with us to administer that. I'm very honored that myself and Emilio Tavares, who is our director of advocacy and a Bronx resident, have been named as advisors to the Adams transition team. And so we are very hopeful we can work with them to make this major public policy improvement. You shouldn't have to go to 8 different offices to get 6 different benefits.
Yeah. And that's it, the streamlining of event. I think so many times when we talk about food insecurity and hunger, prior to the pandemic, there was this access to resources on the part of the public having a hard time really accessing resources. Are you finding now with the pandemic that and this food insecurity surge that now more and more people are finding more access to these resources?
Some, but there's still not a lot of knowledge, particularly people who are newly eligible do not know what they're eligible for. The pandemic EBT program is still relatively new, and that's why the work of Hunger Free America and others is so critical in continuing to get the word out.
Yeah, and so for people who want to support the work of Hunger Free America, how do they go about doing that?
Go to hungerfreeamerica.org. That's hungerfreeamerica.org. Now, I'm assuming if you can watch BronxNet on cable, you probably have internet access, but if not, you're still old school and want to call, you can call us at 212-825-0028.
Yeah. And before we wrap up, I want to get a chance to talk a little bit about the closing the meal gap. And that's an important thing in 2021. So that act. So talk to us about that.
Well, Senator Gillibrand has proposed a number of bills. One, like closing the meal gap, would increase the value of SNAP benefits. We just did an event with her at Hostos Community College to highlight her EATS Act, which would make it easier for college students to be able to access SNAP nutrition assistance benefits. And so there really are a wide variety of actions we need the federal government to take. The problem isn't our elected officials. The problem is the elected officials from Iowa and Utah and Arizona and West Virginia. So we really need a national movement to pressure them to do better.
Yeah. And so when we talk about the national movement, obviously we know the challenges that are felt locally. I know there's some resistance sometimes by people, and I wonder what kind of rock they're living under when they think that there's not a food insecurity issue. It's amazing to have conversations with some people who say that's really not a problem. Have you found that to be the case too?
If you could only hear that, that was a very deep sigh. Yes, I've been working on this issue more than 25 years, and I've been fighting against people who still deny this is a problem. And let me be clear, it's not accidental. There's some well-meaning people who don't understand it's a problem, but in the same way, some people are paid a lot of money to lie to us about climate change and say we don't know if it's really happening. People are paid a lot of money to lie to us about hunger and say, oh, we don't know if it's a problem. Oh, well, there's obesity. There can't be hunger. People have smartphones now. There can't be hunger, ignoring the fact that smartphones are a key tool to keep in employment. And why would people lie about this? Because if you admit it's a problem, then you have to take steps to raise wages, increase employment, reduce the cost of housing, and make sure the wealthy pay their fair share to pay for an adequate nutrition safety net. And so it makes people feel better. Oh, this is a problem for North Korea or India or Honduras, but not a problem for, America. That's a very, very convenient, but very dangerous denial. And so I patiently and not so patiently have spent the last few decades of helping try to educate people. Now, there was a great, great, great philosopher named Chico Marx from the Marx Brothers. And he once said, who are you going to believe? Me or your own eyes? And I just say that to any doubters. Go to a soup kitchen, go to a food pantry, go to a great program like POTS in the Bronx, part of the solution in the Bronx, and see people lined up in the cold to get food. If you don't believe me, because I'm an advocate and a service provider, then go to one of these agencies. POTS has a long affiliation with the Catholic Church. There are many, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, Hindu, based organizations throughout New York City, the faith-based Armies of Compassion. Don't believe me? Go see people lining up for food. Go talk to low-income people. They will tell you that hunger is a very, very real problem, and ignoring it isn't going to make it go away.
Joe Berg, we got to leave it there, but thank you so much for the conversation, and we'll continue to follow these initiatives as they go forward. Love to have you back in the new year so we can get an update as to how things are working out with the new mayoral administration. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you so much.
All righty. Well, we want to let our viewers know that we've come to the end of our show today, and we hope that you really enjoyed today's discussion as we've talked a lot about these several issues. Now, listen, if you want to be part of it and find out more about it, please rejoin the cablecast and recheck it out again on BronxNet's channel 67. And then also we tell you that if you want to be able to see more again, go to the website, BronxNet.org. And if you want to join the conversation again, our social media platforms are available at BronxNet TV. Join us next week, God willing, where we'll be able to enlighten you, bring you more conversation, elevate the discussion, and bring you some more very pertinent, I should say, social justice issues. I'm Daren Jaime saying take care and God bless.